Female serial killers. How many can you name without Google? I mean, if you're like me, you might have said Rosemary West or Myra Hyndley, and I would say nice. I'm really glad you brought those up, because they both had something in common. They were acting with or for a man. Today's death row inmate is different in one seminal way. She acted alone and with malice aforethought. This is much rarer to see in females that kill, and why today's subject is so upsettingly fascinating.
Just shot in self-defense, boom, boom, boom. You know, they weren't cut up, they weren't sliced up, no OJ jazz, you know. And he said, I did the most horrendous crime in the whole wide world.
Not true?
I guess not.
So today, we're going to take a look at the life and crimes of a lady called Aileen Wuornos, who murdered 7 men in Florida in 1989 and 1990 by shooting them at point blank range.
All they were was shot and left. If it was a horrendous crime, why didn't I shoot them between the eyes, cut their penis off, stick it in their mouth, you know, do all kinds of gross stuff? All they were was shot and left, you know?
Wuornos claimed that her victims had either raped or attempted to rape her while they were soliciting sex from her, and that all of the homicides were committed in self-defense. Wuornos has been of great interest to the world of criminal psychology, as her crimes are consistent with the psychopathology model of women that kill, but also there are huge variables like acting alone, something not commonly seen with female serial killers. It's thought that women that commit such crimes usually, in most cases, not all, act with or for a man, not so often alone, making Aileen the first ever predatory female serial killer in the USA. Popular YouTuber Dr. Todd Grande, probably best known for his mental health clinic that he owns in Washington, is a licensed mental health professional that shares insights, and he explains this better than I ever could. So take it away, Dr. Todd Grande.
So first, the overview on female killers. Usually when we hear about a woman who commits murder, it's in the context of an abusive relationship. Perhaps she was a victim of domestic violence and was fighting back. Perhaps her actions are justified. Maybe not, but either way, that's a popular situation in which we see female killers being discussed, or sometimes we see them being discussed in the context of a conspiracy with a man. So for example, a man and a woman, say they're in a romantic relationship, and maybe they rob banks together or rob stores together, and in the commission of one of those robberies, the man commits a murder, or the woman does. But either way, the theory would be, but not for that relationship with the man, the woman would not be a killer. Rarely do we hear about female killers who are predatory, where there's no self-defense reason given. No defense can be argued on that basis. So, again, predatory means that somebody's seeking out other people and killing them. Also, we seldom hear about serial homicide perpetrated by women. So, the research literature on this topic really doesn't tell us enough. There are a few women who fit this category, predatory serial killing, and the articles that we do have tend to emphasize victimization aspects, like that intimate partner violence aspect I talked about, and not some of the other personality constructs that may be at work. No matter which aspects they look at, they almost never talk about women killing for material reasons. So that's what really I think makes this case unique. Not only do you have somebody who's predatory, a serial killer, but after the killings, Aileen Wuornos took money, right? So there was a material gain as part of these murders.
Thank you, Dr. Todd Grande, for that wonderful overview. Go subscribe to his channel, he's got loads of videos on there. Moving on. Wuornos also allegedly met the criteria for both borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder, and it's been said that the traumatic experiences throughout most of her young life could play a part in her psychological state, and therefore her crimes. We'll get into all of that today, so please be warned, it will get a bit heavy and there is a lot to cover. But this is the story of America's first female predatory serial killer, Aileen Wuornos.
No, I wasn't born bad. You guys got it. See, I'm trying to tell you, man, they lied. They lied so bad to you.
Part
all.
1. Who is Aileen Wuornos?
Our story starts in Rochester, a city in Oakland County in the US state of Michigan. It has a good reputation today and seems as though it wasn't one of the worst places to live. However, that did very little to change the things to come. On February the 29th, 1956, Diane Wuornos was 14 years old when she'd married Eileen's father, 16-year-old Leo Dale Pittman, and gave birth to Eileen Carol Pittman, soon to be Aileen Wuornos. She had never met her father as he was incarcerated at the time of her birth. Leo Dale Pittman was also diagnosed with schizophrenia and later convicted of sex crimes against children. He committed suicide by hanging in prison in 1969, but Eileen's mother tried to stick around for a bit until Aileen was around 4 years old and her mother left to go out one night, leaving Aileen with her maternal grandparents just to babysit, but then she never came back, effectively abandoning her with Laurie and Britta Wuornos, the grandparents, who were both sadly alcoholics. The grandparents legally adopted Aileen and her little brother Keith in 1960. Already faced with an array of deleterious situations, you would think that this would be all, but it gets much worse. Eileen's grandfather, Britta, allegedly beat her mercilessly and consistently throughout all of her childhood. Before beating her, allegedly, he would force her to strip down out of her clothes and frequently abuse her sexually. By the age of 11, Wuornos began engaging in sexual activities in school in exchange for things like cigarettes, drugs and food. In 1970, at just age 14, she became pregnant, having been raped by an accomplice of her grandfather. Aileen gave birth to a boy at a home for unwed mothers on March the 23rd, 1971, and the child was quickly placed up for adoption. A few months after her son was born, she dropped out of school, and at the same time, her grandmother had also died of liver failure. Aileen described her grandmother as weak and frail and never doing anything to stop the abuse. When Aileen was 15, her grandfather threw her out of the house and she began supporting herself by soliciting sex and living in the woods near her home. I managed to find an interview with the wonderful power of the internet. It's with a childhood friend of Eileen's and I feel like she had some really nice context to the story, so I'll include it here.
I first met Aileen when I was in first grade. And from then on, I fell behind, but she went on. But I remember her always, in every school that I ever went to, Aileen went to school with me. Aileen was a quiet girl, and I knew that she was a troubled girl. No one wanted to play with her when she was little. I always felt sorry for her. But they didn't want to play with her because she would just sit on the little step by the back, door where you go into your class. I think she was like withdrawn. She looked lonely, scared. I think he was real abusive to her, the grandfather. He was a real mean man.
So, at 15 years old, she has already been through what I guess most would agree is a great deal. It's always morbid comparing backgrounds of people, but it would be doing a disservice to not mention and consider this amount of trauma when talking about her crimes. There are no excuses, but there are reasons.
Part 2. Tribulation.
Pure abuse and pure assault. I don't understand why you people think that I should sit here and cry my brains out for somebody who is going to kill me or rape me or beat me to death.
The question is, was it self-defense? Were all 7 of these men the monsters that Aileen claimed they were? To say they were all violent rapists that deserved it is a very lofty claim to make.
Did you kill those 7 men?
I killed them, I didn't murder them.
Explain the difference to me.
Okay, murder is first-degree murder in intent, and killing is something you have to do in defense.
So you're saying that all 7 of those homicides were justifiable?
In my Oldie.
So now that we
Yes.
have a better idea of who Aileen was and heard a lot about her, let's talk about the crimes. This is where all the controversy is, and I will try and explain why. I found a great show called Geraldo, filmed in '93 with a few people who were close to the case in various ways, and Aileen herself does an exclusive jailhouse interview. I'll be using clips from that as we go through the 7 murders, but let's see if we can get a better idea of what was actually going on. So, from the age of 16, she had left home and hit the road. She travelled the states until she ended up in Daytona at age 20, where she was arrested for armed robbery but ended up being charged for just having a gun. She says it wasn't a robbery, however, and, well, I guess I'll just let her explain it.
How old were you when you hit the streets then?
I was 16 when I left Michigan, and I was 4 years on the road across the United States. I traveled across the United States 7 times in 1 year and everything. And
When did you get to Florida?
when I was 20 years old, and I've stayed in Daytona ever since I was 20.
And were you prostituting that whole time? Is that how you
No.
paid the bills?
No, I had regular jobs until I got that armed robbery charge, which I didn't mean to rob the store. I was out to blow my brains out because I was in love with this guy real bad, and he was dumping me. And the lady in the store saw the gun, and she thought I was going to rob the store. She just started freaking out.
So were you convicted of armed robbery?
Yeah, he didn't want to give me any sentence, but I had a gun on me, so he had to give me 3 years. And when I got out, I went to Maryland, and this guy that I met through a correspondence here, he turned out to be a real weirdo, and I left him, and then I met Tony, this girl. He told me she was a lesbian, and since I was having so many problems with men, I decided, let me try it with a woman.
So you began a lesbian relationship.
Yeah, I fell really in love with her because we were very compatible. But I wasn't interested in the sex part, because I wasn't even a lesbian. But because I could be compatible with her, I agreed to go ahead with the sex acts. And I found out that it was pretty nice, it was all right. But my main concern was being compatible with somebody and sharing my love and sharing myself with them.
So you start with Tony.
Okay.
Were you then at the same time prostituting?
No. I was working a regular job, aluminum siding, putting up aluminum siding and stuff. But then I lost that job, worked for a shrimper. He was having sex with me, but he was constantly having sex with me, not paying me my money. So one day I decided to write some, because I worked for him for like 5 weeks and he didn't pay me my money. So I decided to write up some checks. And so I went to the bank, tried to cash it. I got busted. They said it was a forged check and all this jazz. So I went to jail, and they
You
found...
went to jail again. So
Yeah.
the first one was armed robbery, then
Yeah,
forged
then the forged checks. They're trumping the charges on.
How much
to
time?
give me 8 to 10 years in prison. I ran. I said, forget it, I'm running. And when I ran, that's when I turned into a prostitute.
I see. And how many
And I would
customers
work-
would you have in the typical day?
It wasn't just customers, there was a lot of cars involved. Going throughout the day, meeting so many people, I would say I went in and out of vehicles without sexual contact now. I'd say 35, 40, maybe 50 cars a day.
And how many would you find a successful business arrangement?
And I'd meet at least anywhere from 3 to 6.
What was the going rate at that time?
Well, I charged 30 for 35 straight, 40 for half and half, and 100 an hour, and I'd get about 10 customers a month for 100 an hour, and I had mostly they were interested in, and that only took a very short time, a couple minutes, and so it was easy to make money very quickly, get back
It
out of
seemed
car,
as
get
though
on the
life was rough for Aileen, constantly handing a shit hand after shit hand, forcing her to play the game of life with almost no chance of winning. It's honestly sad. I know she's a murderer, but it's hard not to see someone who has been completely and entirely let down by everyone around her. She was used, abused, and treated like less than human by most people she met, and what glimmers of hope she did have were almost always swiftly ripped away. I'm by no means condoning what she has done, but none of this was considered by the courts when giving her the death sentence, as it likely would have been today. The first murder was of a man called Richard Mallory, and is likely the most debated out of the bunch. Interestingly, Mallory was a convicted rapist and had actually been caught out by Dateline NBC in some sort of sting. He was a well-known scumbag with an extensive criminal history. This murder is the one where the self-defense argument might really hold some water. Aileen claimed that she was sodomized and brutally beaten after being driven to an abandoned area for sexual requests. 2 days later, a Volusia County deputy sheriff found Mallory's abandoned vehicle, and on December the 13th, his body was found several miles away from the vehicle in a wooded area. He had been shot several times, with 2 bullets to the left lung that was found to have been the cause of death. That's the official story, but I'll let Aileen explain how it went down in more detail from her point of view, and of course, be warned, it's a little graphic.
Tell me about Mallory. What did Mallory do? He started to strangle you?
Yeah, and then he pulled me back toward him and had me kind of laying on the seat where my legs were up like this, and he's choking me, and he said, that you better do what I say or I'll kill you right now, you bitch, and I'll kill you now. You later don't matter to me, your body will still be warm. I've killed other sluts like you, and it don't make no difference to me because I've done it before, and stuff like this.
And how'd you manage to reach your gun?
I started fighting with him, and he slapped me in the face, and I grabbed his arm over here, and he hits me again with this arm. I'm grabbing his arms, and there was a lot of arm flinging and everything. And finally, he was choking me, and I spit in his face. He got back up, and he said, "Boy, you're going to be a lot of fun, bitch." I fell on my back, and I kind of fell to the floor, grabbing for the gun, and my back and my shoulder was on the floor. And when he was coming at me, he was reaching towards me, and I shot twice as fast as I could.
Shot him twice as he leaned over you in the front seat? Was that the only time you shot him?
No. When I shot him twice, he started coming back at me again. I shot him one more time.
Did it become easier to kill after Mallory?
I didn't want to kill anybody. I didn't.
But as an option, did it become more accessible to you after Mallory? I mean,
No,
was it like a
really
taboo was lifted in some way?
No, I felt really kind of bad about the situation, but then I felt like, well, to me, I felt the guy deserved it.
In court, none of Mallory's criminal history was taken into account, making Aileen's plea of self-defense seem unlikely, and the argument fell flat on its face. So, on January the 14th, 1992, Aileen went to trial for the murder of Mallory. Although previous convictions are normally inadmissible in criminal trials, under Florida's Williams rule, the prosecution was allowed to introduce evidence related to Aileen's other crimes to show a pattern of illegal activity. Then, on the 27th of January 1992, Aileen was convicted of Mallory's murder with the help from Aileen's former lover at the time's testimony that she exchanged for immunity in the case. Without this testimony, a conviction would have been much harder. At her sentencing, psychiatrists for the defense testified that Aileen was mentally unstable and had been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder. But just 4 days later, she was sentenced to death. It's almost uncontested at this point that the justice system failed here, and Aileen was unfairly trapped by the state of Florida with the case of Mallory, but she had of course killed a further 6 men in a similar fashion, but at this point her fate was sealed, and she rapidly started to deteriorate mentally and actually wish for death. The other men who lost their lives to Aileen were David Andrew Spears, aged 47 and a construction worker in Winter Garden, Charles Edmund Cascadon, age 40 and a part-time rodeo worker, Peter Abram Sims, age 65 and a retired merchant seaman, Troy Eugene Barres, age 50 and a sausage salesman from Ocala, and then Charles Richard Dick Humphreys, and he was actually a retired US Air Force major and former state child abuse investigator and former chief of police. So at this point it is safe to say that Aileen wasn't just targeting criminal vagrants and back alley vagabonds, she was being seriously callous. Then finally there was Walter Geno Antonio, age 62 and a trucker, security guard and police reservist. It's thought that the rest of the men picked up Aileen as a hitchhiker, not as a prostitute, and she murdered them purely to steal their cars and belongings. A truly wretched thing to take somebody's life over. Aileen would be charged with all 7 of the men's murders and sentenced to death, but it wouldn't be until the 9th of October 2002 she would actually lose her life by capital punishment. In a 2001 petition, a year before her death, to the Florida Supreme Court, she stated her intentions to dismiss her legal counsel and terminate all pending appeals. She wrote, and I quote,
"I killed those men, robbed them cold as ice, and I'd do it again too. There's no chance in keeping me alive or anything, because I'd do it again, I'd kill. I have hate crawling through my system. I'm so sick of hearing this she's crazy stuff. I've been evaluated so many times. I'm competent, sane, and I'm trying to tell the truth. I'm one who seriously hates human life and would kill again."
Truly chilling words to hear from somebody who is a convicted serial killer. Her last words were,
"Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock and I'll be back, like Independence Day with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie, big mothership and all. I'll be back, I'll be back."
End quote. But she refused her last meal, opting instead for just a cup of coffee. Many would comment on her noticeable mental deterioration before her execution. In a series of interviews, she would say things like people were talking about her to try and send her crazy to commit suicide before her execution, and her food was being contaminated with things like urine and dirt. It was clear to most that spoke to her or seen her speaking in the months before her end date, she was suffering. Some would say, however, this is a fitting end for such a monster. Others would disagree. But what do you think? Did Aileen Wuornos deserve to die? And that's the story of Aileen Wuornos, a tortured soul that was pushed beyond the brink of sanity, or a cold-blooded monster who had hate in her heart. Whatever the weather, she's gone now and she will never hurt another person or be hurt by another person again. Take care out there. There's a new video coming out in about a week or so, and if you enjoyed this video, please do consider leaving a like or a comment, because it does help the channel massively. But thank you for watching. Take care. Peace.